That is All In on the Tuesday night. The briefing with Jen Psaki starts right now. Good evening, Jen.
Chris, of all the news today, and there was a lot, and I have two incredible legal experts, Kristen Clark, Jamie Raskin, sitting here at the table with me. But today, the financial disclosures, did you see the financial disclosures? I may have missed this if you talked about it, but they came out. Trump made a whole lot of money from meme coins.
My jaw unhinged at about 7:56 when I saw the push alert about the $2.2 billion the president made in his first year in office, and wasn't able to talk about, but I'm glad you're going to.
Oh, well, we're going to try, but it just put in perspective for me the time we were worried that, Joe Biden buying a nice house in Delaware was going to really raise eyebrows. Puts it all in perspective, doesn't it? Anyway,
Crazy.
Have a good night. I'll talk to you tomorrow.
You too.
Okay, there is a ton to get to tonight. I just mentioned two of my guests I'm starting with who are incredible. I'll be talking to them in just a moment. I should tell you also right off the bat, the polls have just closed in the great state of Colorado. There are some really interesting primaries happening tonight in the race for governor, the race for U.S. Senate, and one particular House seat where longtime House member Diana DeGette is trying to fend off a challenge from a young Democratic socialist. So we're going to be tracking those numbers all hour long. We're going to have Ali Velshi tell us what's happening at the big board when we get some numbers in as well. But I, of course, want to start with the rulings from the Supreme Court that happened this morning, specifically the ruling on birthright citizenship, because of all the things Donald Trump genuinely seems to care about, this one has always been near the top. I mean, if you had to pick one issue that has defined his political career, one single issue that helps explain his rise to power on the political right and his takeover of the Republican Party, that issue would have to be the question of who gets to be an American citizen. I mean, years before he officially launched his first campaign, Trump became a bit of a political hero of the far right by repeatedly questioning the citizenship of America's first black president. And I remember it quite well from being in the White House at the time. Over and over, without a shred of evidence, obviously, Trump repeatedly suggested that there was reason to doubt that Barack Obama was born in the United States.
I would be very happy if he produced a real birth certificate. So either they don't have one, which is very bad, or there's something on it that he doesn't want people to see. Why doesn't he show his birth certificate? And you know what? I wish he would, because I think it's a terrible pall that's hanging over him. When I first started, I assumed he was born here when it was first day. Now I have a real doubt.
How he's getting away with this whole birth certificate scam. This whole thing is incredible.
You are not allowed to be a president if you're not born in this country. He may not have been born in this country. If he wasn't born in this country, it's one of the great scams of all time.
Absolutely.
Even though his claims were roundly dismissed by the Republican Party establishment at the time, it was definitely an example of how conspiracies can travel. False conspiracies, fake conspiracies, crazy made-up conspiracies. And one early morning, we even gathered the press corps in the White House briefing room without really telling them what it was about to hand reporters copies of President Obama's birth certificate. That's how much that traveled. And in the process of pushing his birther conspiracy, though, Trump managed to build himself a cult following within the Republican Party. In fact, at the height of his birther crusade in April of 2011, he rose to the top of some early Republican primary polls, despite never being a declared candidate for the 2012 presidential race. His national political identity was built on that birther lie. And the unfortunate lesson for Trump from all the hysteria he created was that weaponizing citizenship could win him votes. It could win him political power. It showed him that if he sold racist nonsense, there would be a market for it out there, maybe a big one that would help propel his political power. Now, 4 years later, when he did decide to run for president, Trump centered his campaign around this same theme, pushing fears of an American takeover by outside forces, calling immigrants rapists, proposing a wall on the southern border, and calling for a ban on Muslims entering the country. It was his unabashed xenophobia that propelled him to his first term in the White House. But when he floated the idea of an actual executive order to end birthright citizenship, he was categorically shot down by other members of his own party. I mean, here was how then Speaker of the House Paul Ryan reacted to that idea back in 2018.
Well, you obviously cannot do that. You cannot end birthright citizenship with an executive order. Obviously, as conservatives, we believe in the Constitution. As a conservative, I'm a believer in following the plain text of the Constitution, and I think in this case the 14th Amendment's pretty clear.
I mean, that clip that you just played, you just heard, that was from only 8 years ago. It feels like a lot longer than that, though. Of course, Donald Trump slowly but surely pushed people like Paul Ryan completely out of his party. And when he returned to office in 2025, this time surrounded by sycophants, he literally made an executive order to end birthright citizenship a day one priority, signing just hours into his presidency. And today, almost a year and a half later, the Supreme Court rejected Trump's attempts to redefine who gets to be an American citizen. John Roberts and Amy Coney Barrett joined the three liberal justices in deciding that Trump's efforts to end birthright citizenship are unconstitutional. And that is unquestionably good news. The Republican-leaning Supreme Court did not allow him to fundamentally change what it means to be born on American soil. But this decision, as welcome as it is, does not undo the damage Donald Trump has caused. I mean, for starters, there is the way Donald Trump has fundamentally shifted the position of his party on this core American value. It was only 8 years ago that the Republican Speaker of the House was telling Trump in no uncertain terms that he could not do this. But the Republican Party of Trump's second term is a whole lot different from the Republican Party in 2018. I mean, here was the reaction of the current Republican Speaker of the House when reporters told him that Trump's order had been struck down.
It just came down.
Oh, dear.
That decision is children born in the United States, parents unlawfully or temporarily present, are subject to the jurisdiction of the United States and are citizens at birth under the 14th Amendment Citizenship Clause. What's your reaction to that, Mr. Speaker?
Was that a groan? Was it a growl? I don't know. You can define it for yourself. But that was Mike Johnson, clearly disappointed that the court upheld the principle that Paul Ryan, his predecessor just 8 years ago, was once willing to vocally defend. And it's not just the movement of Congress, it's the movement of the Republican ecosystem. I mean, 10 years ago, the conservative media outlet The Federalist published multiple opinion pieces from a variety of conservative voices arguing in favor of birthright citizenship. As one writer said, birthright citizenship is protected no less for children of undocumented persons than for descendants of Mayflower passengers. And today, the CEO of that same conservative outlet said states should either nullify the court's decision or, quote, require sterilization of all foreign visitors prior to entry. Okay, we get numb sometimes, so let me just repeat that again. Sterilization of foreign visitors is what he called for. Now, ahead of today's ruling, lots of legal experts believed that birthright citizenship was so fundamental to this country that the overwhelming majority of justices on the court, possibly even all 9, would uphold it. Instead, only 5 justices ruled that ending birthright citizenship is unconstitutional. A 6th, Justice Kavanaugh, joined the majority in rejecting Trump's order, but issued his own opinion, saying that Congress could simply pass a law to end birthright citizenship and accomplish the president's goals. Donald Trump, who, let's just say, normally reacts to adverse court rulings with quite a bit of performative outrage, issued a relatively sanguine statement, saying Congress could, quote, easily make it up through legislation. Senator Ted Cruz echoed Trump's call for legislation to end birthright citizenship, saying Congress should take it up immediately. My point is this. The Supreme Court's decision today, even after 18 months of limbo, was good news, unquestionably. But their narrow ruling was far too close for comfort, and it should feel that way. I mean, just listen to the way Vice President J.D. Vance reacted to it on Fox News earlier tonight.
A lot of legal experts expected this case to go the wrong direction by 7-2 or even 8-1. The fact that this case was a 5-4 decision effectively means that the concept of birthright citizenship, which is an absurdity to the 14th Amendment, that concept is hanging by a thread. We've just got to keep fighting at this.
The Vice President of the United States just said it's hanging by a thread, and we've just got to keep fighting at this. See, Donald Trump and J.D. Vance and Stephen Miller, of course, none of them are giving up on this issue. The Trump administration understands, or they believe, that this issue is important to his hold on power within his base of the Republican Party. There's nothing more important to him than that. And while the court may have handed him a loss on birthright citizenship today, they also handed him a victory just 100 days before the midterm elections, because in a separate ruling this morning, the court's conservative majority upended campaign finance rules, a decision that is going to give national parties, which in the case of the Republicans is essentially run by Trump, far more influence over their candidates by allowing them to spend unlimited funds from the party committees on campaigns. We're going to talk more about what that means and how Democrats fight back later this hour. But yeah, we can all breathe a sigh of relief that the Supreme Court did not upend more than 150 years of what it means to be a natural-born American citizen. But this fight is far from over. That's why we got to keep talking about it. I cannot think of two people I'd rather have on this table. At this table tonight, Congressman Jamie Raskin is the top Democrat on the House Judiciary Committee, and Kristen Clark is the former Assistant Attorney General for Civil Rights at the U.S. Department of Justice and now the General Counsel for the NAACP. Thank you both for being here with me. Let me start with you, Congressman. I just talked a little bit about Trump's longtime obsession with this question of who gets to be a real American, who benefits from being an American. And what you heard, I think, from J.D. Vance and also from Trump and his relatively sanguine response was this notion that they're going to keep fighting this. They're going to keep at it. What did you take away from the ruling today and also really the response from the administration? Well,
J.D. Vance made it clear they see this as a 5-4 decision and one that's a sitting duck for further mega Republican Federalist Society-style organizing. And if they could just get one more seat on the court, then they'd be able to flip it over with the right federal statute. Chip Roy showed up in the Judiciary Committee right after the opinion was handed down and said, we're going to fight this and we're going to pass a law to make this happen. So I think that's very much on the agenda. Remember, this really goes to the core of what it means to be an American. The first sentence of the 14th Amendment, which says that all persons born or naturalized in the United States and subject to the jurisdiction thereof are citizens of the United States and of their state. And that overturned the Dred Scott decision, which had tried to define American citizenship with respect to blood and race. You know, it basically said that the Constitution was a white man's compact, and the white man did not have to respect any rights that African Americans had, and African Americans could not be citizens within the meaning of the Diversity Jurisdiction Clause. So it's amazing that they're organizing essentially around that white supremacist principle. And, you know, we can be grateful that the decision came out the way it did, but it was completely obvious it should have been 9-0. The text of the Constitution is clear. The history behind the Constitution is clear. The way it's always been understood is clear. And the only thing that's changed is MAGA Republicans control the House and the Senate, the White House and the Supreme Court, and they want to redefine citizenship.
Yeah, and I want to come back to Congress because the Chip Roy piece is interesting. It's very consistent with what you've already heard from them. But, Kristen, let me ask you, I know in the best way you're a nerd who probably read a lot, all of the dissents and the opinion. As you were reading it, there you go. I love it. We love nerds here. What was your takeaway? What are we missing? What do you think people should understand about how the justices approach this today?
Yeah, it's a long ruling, 191 pages. And a big chunk of that was Justice Thomas's dissent, which is revisionist in every respect. It defies this colorblind approach to the Constitution that he has taken during his time on the bench. But, you know, what this is an unequivocal rejection of Trump's attempt to redefine what it means to be an American in our country. And this is a project that started before January of 2025, right? This dates back to his first term in office. This is a decade-long effort that has failed. At the end of the day, our democracy is nothing without the Constitution, and I'm grateful that 6 of these 9 justices had good reason to side with just a plain reading of the 14th Amendment, the heart of our Constitution.
Stephen Miller is probably chewing his nails or, I don't know, stress eating tonight or something. But it seems like, again, they want to keep fighting this. They think there's political power in this, right? Put aside whether they have the votes, which I do not think they do have the votes. You tell me if I'm wrong there, and certainly not in the Senate, but I don't even think in the House for this. Do they have the legal ability to push this through Congress, do you think?
Well, no, because at least 5 justices have now said this is the meaning of the Constitution, reaffirming what the Supreme Court has said throughout its history. This is the meaning of the Constitution. But the problem is, well, you've got Thomas, you've got Alito and Gorsuch, and then Kavanaugh kind of split the difference and said, well, the federal statutory law now establishes birthright citizenship, but that could be undone by Congress, which is what J.D. Vance is picking up on and saying, well, right there, we're going to have 5-4. And if we can somehow just get one more seat, we can actually revolutionize the meaning of the Constitution by overturning it. And they think there's political mileage in it. And remember, these are people who right now have no program for America, Jen. It's not like they've got a way to try to get health care to the millions of people who still don't have it, or they've got some plan for infrastructure or making housing more accessible. All they've got is culture war day in and day out, which is why it, one day it's the 10 Commandments, and the next day it's, beating up on transgender kids, and the next day it's, we're going to go back to Dred Scott's interpretation of the Constitution. There's a beautiful concurring opinion in here by Justice Jackson taking on and chiding Justice Thomas, saying, you've always said before that the Constitution mandates absolute colorblindness to the extent that you can't even have proactive affirmative remedies to deal with racism. But now all of a sudden, he's redefining the first sentence of the 14th Amendment to exclude certain groups and their children in the country.
The congressman mentioned transgender. I mean, there were other rulings today. So there was another ruling today, which I think everybody is probably following, which allowed states to bar transgender athletes from girls' sports. One of the things I've seen out there from some legal experts, but I'm interested in your view, is that it's not just about this, that this is a slippery slope to potentially go after, something more expansive, the ability, against discrimination of any kind based on gender. What do you think? Is this a slippery slope to a larger objective and goal? What should we be clear-eyed about here?
Yeah. I mean, what a great ruling on birthright citizenship, but no doubt the transgender sports question that went before the court came out terribly. A tremendous setback for the LGBTQ movement in our country. And I think about transgender children who suffer from high rates of suicide and depression, and simply want the ability to participate like all other kids. I do think that our civil rights statute and the architecture of our civil rights movement is unraveling quickly. This Trump administration has, turned the clock back when it comes to enforcement of our federal civil rights. I used to lead the Civil Rights Division, which is nothing more than a shadow of its former self. And we have a court now that is expressing tremendous hostility to civil rights, especially when it comes to voting rights, right? The Calais decision is one of the most consequential and devastating decisions of this Supreme Court term. So I think it's important that we be vigilant in terms of the work that lies ahead. It's why I think that as we have this conversation, we need to also be talking about the need for Supreme Court reform. The need to figure out how we restore independence and fairness to the court. We need to be talking about term limits, a ban on the shadow docket, and a way to ensure that the Supreme Court is once again a neutral place, so that when these questions about constitutional interpretation and about our civil rights laws and how they should be interpreted and applied go before those 9 justices, we can have confidence that we're getting a fair outcome.
I have no question that less than a year from now, when there's approximately 50 people running for president, that is going to be a central question, as it should, where they see reforms of the court, given what we're looking at. Let me ask you, because there was also a ruling, I referenced this, on campaign finance. In her opinion today, I thought this was interesting, dissenting opinion, I should say, against the court's decision to strike down limits on political party spending. And this essentially enables national party committees, the RNC, the DNC, to give unlimited amounts to campaigns, and they have had limits to date. But she said basically the decision would allow, quote, a legal regime increasingly unable to stop political corruption and thus to preserve our institutions' democratic legitimacy. She seemed to also say that it would make it harder to make the argument that there should be limits on others. You think a lot about corruption and money being used in politics and in government. Where did your mind go as you were reading this?
Well, I mean, this decision just blows the doors off of the hinges in terms of campaign finance, because it says that the national political parties, and of course the Republican National Committee has a lot more money than the Democratic National Committee does right now, can go and spend freely in particular congressional districts and in particular Senate races, just the way that super PACs can. And so there's not much of campaign finance law left. I mean, there's the basic limits on campaign contributions to a House or a Senate candidate or a presidential candidate. But in terms of spending, it's laissez-les bon temps roulé. I mean, anything goes at this point. And so I know that the Republicans are chortling about this because we've been able to outraise them head-to-head in individual districts and even in Senate races across the country. But they have more in their national treasuries, and now it opens the floodgates on that money pouring into our races. So, you know, we will have to, at some point, wrestle the monster to the ground and say, look, corporations are not citizens armed with the political rights of the people under the First Amendment, and we need to restore the capacity to have some notion of fairness in our politics. Otherwise, you're just destroying one person, one vote. But in the meantime, the Democrats are just going to have to rev up the engines of small donor fundraising. The internet has been our savior against big Republican money.
This is a perfect tee up because I'm going to talk to Jen Psaki in a moment just about what needs to be done on the political side. But thank you both, Congressman Raskin, Kirsten Clark. Thank you so much for being here. I really appreciate it.
Thanks for having us.
Okay, coming up today, the Supreme Court greenlit a change in our country's campaign financing laws that has a long, winding, toxic history. Because a decade ago, and this is an interesting part of it, I should say, a decade ago, Democrats and the Tea Party even teamed up to fight it. That was back in December of 2015, and Senator Mitch McConnell, yes, that guy, who was then the Republican leader, slipped an obscure measure into a must-pass omnibus spending bill. And the measure would have allowed unlimited spending by political parties in coordination with candidates. Now, at the time, political parties like the RNC and the DNC were only allowed to coordinate about $50,000 worth of spending per House race. So political parties could definitely put their thumb on the scale a little bit, but they couldn't tip it all that much. McConnell, though, wanted to get rid of limits like that. He wanted political parties and, more importantly, party leaders like himself to be able to put their full fist on the scale so that they could have more control over their members and also over who even became members. And that's why the Tea Party opposed that measure. Some members didn't want to fight against a Republican National Party that could spend unlimited money to defeat them and other Tea Partiers in primaries. They didn't want to disempower super PACs who were helping elect them. And they didn't want to be beholden to D.C. power brokers like Mitch McConnell. That's why that measure failed back in 2015. And then in 2022, J.D. Vance took up the mantle of this fight when he saw what a disadvantage Republicans had in grassroots fundraising. And then finally today, the conservative majority on the Supreme Court finally gave the Republican Party leaders what they actually wanted. Political parties are now able to spend an unlimited amount in coordination with individual political campaigns. And not only does that immediately make both the RNC and the DNC more important, not only does it give the parties the ability to play kingmaker and give huge advantages to incumbents potentially and the party establishment if they choose to, but prior to today, the fundraising that mattered the most was at the individual candidate level. It's still hugely important, but it was from the grassroots donors who are matching the energy we see out in the country. That was really the core of the most important fundraising. And Democratic candidates have been way more successful on that front, outraising their Republican opponents in a lot of unexpected races in parts of the country. But now that political parties can coordinate spending directly with candidates as much as they want, the size of the war chests of the RNC and the DNC really start to matter. And that puts, Jamie Raskin referenced this too, and that puts Republicans at a huge advantage on that front headed into the midterms. And the Democrats have a lot of other advantages, including energy and enthusiasm and grassroots fundraising. But I should note in May, the RNC reported that it had $125 million in its war chest. The DNC, on the other hand, reported that it was $3 million in debt. So with these new rules and a fundraising gap that big, what should Democrats be doing right now to regain power in November? What else? What different, if anything? Joining me now is Jen Psaki, former campaign manager for Barack Obama. Okay, there is so much to say about this. I can tell you, we have been discussing this on the team all day today. But I just give a summary of this ruling. What does it mean? You've run so many campaigns. What does it mean in practice for the campaigns this year?
It's a great night for the Republican candidates. And the reason why, Jen, I'm really glad you led with the Mitch McConnell thing. He spent 10 years trying to do two things. One, to blunt the Democrats' advantage with small donor finances, where we have a massive advantage because we have the grassroots and they don't. And two, he wants to empower the national committees because he wants to decide who the candidates are. And so this is exactly what he's going to get. You know, right now, all three Republican committees, the RNC and both the House and Senate committees, have about $250 million cash on hand. Democrats have about half of that. They now can transfer whatever they want to these individual races. So let me give you an example. In the Texas Senate race, where you and I have been talking for a long time, there's more grassroots enthusiasm about the Democratic candidate than in any race in the country. He has a massive advantage in fundraising because he's getting checks from my mother-in-law online, $5 and $10 every time she sees him on TV. She gives him a little bit more money. That advantage is now gone because Mitch McConnell and the Republicans can now transfer the Republican candidate whatever they want. And more importantly, on the very first day when they're recruiting the Republican candidate, they can say, you're our candidate. There will be no primary because we are going to give you all of the money. So what do Democrats do? We do what we've always done, which is go back to the grassroots, go back to our own donors, and just be very clear about the stakes at hand here and say, we're going to need you to dig a little bit deeper. We have the well that is the modern finance of campaigns, which is the internet. We just have to continue to rely on it. The other thing, more controversial, we've got to figure out is how to get the DNC back in some sort of shape where it can be helpful. You just showed the numbers. We cannot have a DNC that has a negative net balance when the Republicans have $125 million. We just can no longer afford to kind of laugh about how messy that operation is. Instead, we have to go fix it immediately.
I think everybody watching right now is like, yeah, how can it be fixed? What can be done? What should be done to fix it?
Well, there's a small amount of people who make this decision. I think the DNC members all need to be asked today and tomorrow, what is your plan? Like, whatever you're currently doing isn't working. We're not talking about personalities. Ken Martin's a great guy. We're just talking about what do we need to do to figure out how to get this committee to doing things. They've been transferring huge amounts of money to state parties. What is the accountability to that? How do those state parties help these local candidates? Isn't it probably better to transfer that same money to the candidates who are on the ballot in just a few months? We probably got to change that decision starting tomorrow just because of this Supreme Court decision, Jen.
Let me ask you about the Trump side of this, because as I understand it, and correct me if I'm wrong here, this doesn't change the fact that you can't, as a donor, earmark money when you give it to a party committee to go to a particular candidate. But, you know, a lot of your money can go to a particular candidate. When you think about what Trump could do here, he essentially, any president oversees essentially the party apparatus, the RNC or the DNC. Where does your head go in terms of what he could step up fundraising for the RNC? They already have an advantage. What else could he do here to try to take advantage of this ruling?
This just makes it so much more easy for him to coordinate with his billionaires. I mean, just the numbers this year, Jen, are staggering. Republican big donors this year, led by Elon Musk and the Adelson gaming empire in Nevada, have given $880 million in big contributions to the Republican side. The Democrats are less than a third of that from big checks. So what he can do now tomorrow is start calling everyone saying, hey, give everything you can to the RNC because we're going to transfer it directly to these races. He doesn't need to go through the super PACs. This, unfortunately, didn't get rid of the super PACs, which you and I would have done. So instead, what this ruling does is just put more money into the entire system and allow them to earmark it directly to these campaigns. It also makes a whole bunch of people in Washington, D.C. much more important than they were yesterday because they decide where the money goes, not the individual donors.
It does have a little bit of a backroom deal with cigars feeling to it in some regard. It doesn't change, I should note, how much the max amount that individuals can give to the overall party apparatus. But it means they know that the money can go directly to candidates instead of state parties, which they may prefer. Let me ask you just about the impact you foresee on the DNC, on kind of the Democratic Party in primaries, because this also could mean that if the DNC chose to, they could get engaged in primary elections on behalf of incumbents. What are the other impacts we haven't talked about?
Well, first of all, the Democratic senatorial and House committees are going to probably now have more impetus to get involved in these things. The DCCC has gotten involved in primaries this year, very controversially. You and I both know Democrats hate it when DC weighs in, but they've been very forthright about saying there are some campaigns we have to win, and we're going to go in and pick a bigger candidate. Right now, it was just them saying, hey, this is our preferred candidate. Now, Jen, they can go in with a checkbook and say, not only are you our preferred candidate, we're going to put all of our money behind you. And that is just a big moment. And again, back to the DNC is going to have to be able to directly transfer to these campaigns. And they're going to have to kind of stop what they've been doing and reassess, not because they're good people or bad people, or not because what they've been doing is good or bad. The rules changed today, and we all got to roll with it. You and I were part of 2 Obama campaigns that didn't always like the rules, but we had to make very tough decisions to win a presidential election. And I think that's what Democrats are going to do starting tomorrow morning.
Yeah, you can't win a campaign with one arm tied behind your back, playing by old sets of rules or rules you wished were in place. Jim Messina, thank you as always.
Spin ka panashi makhj zama pat paspin ka panashi sabar ba mizrasta da didan shi sabar ba mizrasta da didan shi makhj zama pat paspin ka panashi makhj zama pat paspin ka panashi sabar ba mizrasta da didan sabar ba mizrasta da didan shi sabar ba mizrasta da didan shi makhj zama pat paspin ka panashi makhj zama pat paspin ka panashi sabar ba mizrasta da didan shi sabar ba mizrasta da didan shi sabar ba mizrasta da didan shi makhj zama pat paspin ka panashi makhj zama pat paspin ka panashi sabar ba mizrasta da didan shi sabar ba mizrasta da didan shi پختنا ولې ناراضي اوس مې په پختنا ولې ناراضي اوس مې په پختنا ولې ناراضي اسه به خراب د مینې خوان شي صبر به مې زستا د دیدن شي مخ چې زما پټ پسپین کپنا شي مخ چې زما پټ پسپین کپنا شي صبر به مې زستا د دیدن شي صبر به مې زستا د دیدن شي برباد عبدل زرین کرما اسد برباد عبدل زرین کرما اسد برباد عبدل زرین کرما په आवाज د خالد شامز له پیوان شي صبر با مزستا د دیدن شي مخ چې زما پټ پسپین کپنا شي مخ چې زما پټ پسپین کپنا شي صبر با مزستا د دیدن شي صبر با مزستا د دیدن شي